Hello friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. Before we start, we will chant the Namo Tassa as usual. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone, and today we will continue reading the simile of the quail, Majjhima Nikaya number 66, the Laṭukikopama Sutta, which we started last time, and we did about halfway, and today we will do the second half. And this is a sutta that begins with a bhikkhu called the Venerable Udayan. And Udayan comes to the Buddha and tells him how he was reflecting in meditation, and he remembered that when the Buddha laid down the rules about eating, especially not eating after noon, so in the afternoon and in the evening, Udayan first had a lot of trouble thinking about this. It caused him quite a bit of anxiety, and he couldn't quite understand why it was important to train in this. But then, out of faith and trust in the Buddha, he trained in this, and afterwards he reflected how that had been so beneficial, and how he had gotten so much benefit out of training in this way. And then the Buddha confirms that, and he takes up that topic that Udayan is suggesting. And the Buddha starts talking about people who are attached to material things, and maybe they don't quite understand why that's a problem and why they should let that go. And then the Buddha talks about different people and how for some people letting go of things is very easy, and for some people letting go of things is very difficult. And for those people for whom that is difficult, even the smallest, tiniest thing can become a very strong fetter that ties them to samsara, and that makes it impossible for them to attain awakening or nibbana. And then the Buddha gave the simile of the quail. So quail is a tiny bird, and a tiny bird can be captured and can be bound with really a small string, a very weak kind of bond, a string that's already rotting, that is falling apart almost. Even that much is enough to tie down this tiny bird and to capture this tiny bird. And in the same way, for somebody who is, in the same way, a small, like the most minute thing can be something that can bind some people to samsara if they're not able to let this go. And then the Buddha also used the simile of an elephant, and even the strongest bonds cannot tie down an elephant. An elephant is much stronger than that. He can just twist his body a little and all the bonds fall off, all the chains fall off, and that elephant is then free to go wherever he likes. And so in the same way, somebody who has a lot of abandoning power in his mind can just let go even of the strongest attachments, and can easily let go and become free of all of the bondages and become fully enlightened. And then the Buddha used another simile, that of a poor man and that of a rich man. And that poor person only has very bad items, very low quality possessions, and also the people around him or her, around them, are not very pleasing to them. But even so, even though that person doesn't gain a lot of pleasure from those objects or from those people around them, still they're not able to let them go. And so for some people, even the tiniest things can be strong bonds that prevent them from making progress on the path. And then there is the idea of a rich person, and they have very high quality items and very desirable people around them, and they get a lot of pleasure out of the items and the people around them, but still they have the power to let that go. So for some people, they have a lot of this ability in the mind to let everything go, even the most pleasurable things. So here in this sutta, the Buddha is really talking about how people's faculties are different. And for some people, it's very easy to let things go. And he makes it very clear here that it's not about the external objects, it's not about the other people, it's really about the attachments in our mind that bind us. So it's not the objects, even if the objects are pleasing, we can easily let them go if we have a strong ability to let things go. So, if we don't have that ability, then even unpleasurable things can really tie us down. And that was the point that the Buddha was trying to make in that simile with the poor man and the rich man. And after that, the Buddha continues with 4 kinds of people and how they have different abilities to make progress on the path. So this is where we left off last time, and we will continue reading today. And I have put a link in the live chat to Sutta Central to Bhante Sucato's translation. I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. If you want to read along, this is paragraph 13, both in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation and in Bhante Sucato's translation. So the Buddha says, Udayan, there are 4 kinds of persons to be found existing in the world. What are the 4? Here, Udayan, some person practices the way to the abandoning of the acquisitions, to the relinquishing of the acquisitions. When he is practicing the way, memories and intentions associated with the acquisitions beset him. He tolerates them, he does not abandon them, remove them, do away with them, and annihilate them. Such a person I call fettered, not unfettered. Why is that? Because I have known the particular diversity of faculties in this person. So here we have the first of those 4 kinds of persons. And all of these 4 kinds of persons are people that are practicing the path. So here the Buddha is only talking about practicing Buddhists. He's not talking about persons who are not even trying to practice. So this first kind of person is practicing the Buddhist path, is trying to abandon what he has called the acquisitions, so all the fetters in the mind, all the defilements, everything that binds us to samsara. And when the Buddha talks about acquisitions here, obviously that doesn't just talk about external objects, so material possessions or even people around us or anything. It also talks about the acquisitions in our mind. So whenever we think of something and we form an attachment, we believe that this is ours. So the I-making, the mind-making that our mind likes to do, then we make that into acquisitions of our mind. So that becomes an attachment for us, that becomes like a bondage, something that binds us to samsara, and that is called a mental acquisition. And it is those mental acquisitions that the Buddha is talking about here, not the material possessions. So on the Buddhist path, obviously we are practicing to let go of all these defilements, all these attachments in the mind. And this person also is practicing. And while they are practicing, memories and intentions associated with the acquisitions beset them. So I think we can probably all relate to this. For example, we are sitting there, we're trying to meditate, we're trying to focus on our meditation object. And the whole time distracting thoughts intrude and we are thinking about the past, about memories of the past, or we have intentions, we make plans for the future. We think about various material objects, or maybe we think about other people, something that happened that day or that we want to make happen later. So the whole time, all these thoughts intrude and all these, what the sutta here calls memories and intentions. So memories of the past, intentions for the future, associated with the acquisitions. So I think we can all relate to that. We are meditating and all these thoughts and emotions intrude. And then this first kind of person tolerates them and does not abandon them and does not remove them. So when those thoughts and emotions and memories and intentions intrude, and this person doesn't know what to do and just indulges in all these random thoughts. And of course, such a person the Buddha calls fettered, not unfettered. So such a person obviously is still under the sway of the acquisitions, is still under the sway of the defilements, and obviously is still fettered to samsara and is not liberated from the cycle of rebirth. So is obviously not an arahant or anything yet. It's still somebody who is practicing on the path. And so the Buddha says, why are they fettered? Or why does the Buddha say that they are fettered? Because he has known the particular diversity of faculties in this person. So the Buddha, obviously, he can read minds, so he can understand about people's mental qualities. He can understand how much wisdom they have, how much they are developed on the path. He can understand how much abandoning power they have, so how much ability they have to abandon defilements, how easy it is for them to let things go. So what the topic of this entire sutta, where the Buddha has been talking about how different people have more or less trouble letting things go. And on the one hand, the Buddha can read minds, so he can understand all that. But on the other hand, also, he doesn't really need to read the mind, because this is kind of universal. When you understand how the mind works, then you can already know which qualities will be present in such a person who is still struggling with all these memories and intentions, and who is not really able to properly deal with them, and who gets carried away and indulges in all of them. So you will know that their wisdom isn't all that strong. You will know that their abandoning power isn't all that strong, even though they are still practicing, or even though they are already practicing, but they haven't gotten that far yet. So those people are still fettered to samsara. This is the first kind of person. And then the second kind of person, the Buddha says, here Udayan, some person practices the way to the abandoning of the acquisitions, to the relinquishing of the acquisitions. When he's practicing the way, memories and intentions associated with the acquisitions beset him. He does not tolerate them, he abandons them, removes them, does away with them, and annihilates them. Such a person too I call fettered, not unfettered. Why is that? Because I have known the particular diversity of faculties in this person. So now here we have the second kind of person, the same as the first kind of person. They're also practicing. And while they're practicing, all these memories and intentions, thoughts, emotions about the past, about the future, about their things, about people, about anything that happened in their life, or any daydream that they might have, anything associated with the acquisitions, come to him or come to them. And that can happen in meditation. It can also happen in daily life. It can basically happen at any time. And again, I think most people are familiar with those kind of intrusive thoughts while we're trying to practice. But this second kind of person does not tolerate them. And when they become aware of those memories and intentions, they are able to let them go. So they're able to return to their mindfulness, they're able to return to a wholesome object, or they're able to make the mind calm, and they don't run away, and they don't, with those defilements and with those stray thoughts, and they don't let those acquisitions take over their mind, and they don't lose their mindfulness in the same way. But still, such a person is still fettered, the Buddha says, because all these random thoughts still pop up in their mind and still kind of are present there, and obviously haven't been fully abandoned. That kind of person still is fettered, not unfettered. So they are on the practice path, but they still have way to go. And then there is a third kind of person. And for that third person, the Buddha says, here Udayan, some person practices the way to the abandoning of the acquisitions, to the relinquishing of the acquisitions. When he is practicing the way, memories and intentions associated with the acquisitions beset him now and then through lapses of mindfulness. His mindfulness may be slow in arising, but he quickly abandons them, removes them, does away with them, and annihilates them. Just as if a man were to let 2 or 3 drops of water fall onto an iron plate heated for a whole day. The falling of the water drops might be slow, but they would quickly vaporize and vanish. So too, here some person practices the way to the abandoning of the acquisitions, to the relinquishing of the acquisitions. When he is practicing the way, memories and intentions associated with the acquisitions beset him now and then through lapses of mindfulness. His mindfulness may be slow in arising, but he quickly abandons them, removes them, does away with them, and annihilates them. Such a person, too, I call fettered, not unfettered. Why is that? Because I have known the particular diversity of faculties in this person. So now here we have a third kind of person, and that person is already a bit more advanced than the first two. They have mindfulness that is a lot stronger. So for them, for the most point, the thoughts, those stray thoughts and emotions don't intrude anymore. For the most part, their mindfulness is really strong. But every now and then, obviously, since they're not arahants, their mindfulness lapses and those thoughts can intrude again. And eventually they will regain their mindfulness. And when they regain the mindfulness, then immediately they let go of those thoughts, those memories and intentions that are connected with the acquisitions. So their mindfulness is a lot stronger and they have a lot more abandoning power, and they can abandon stuff very, very quickly. And so here the Buddha uses this simile of somebody who lets a few water drops fall on a hot iron plate. And of course, while the water drops fall, that takes maybe a few seconds or fractions of a second to fall. So some kind of amount of time to fall down, or maybe the forming of the drop takes a little while and then it sort of detaches and then falls down. So that can take a little while. But once it hits that hot iron plate, then immediately it is vaporized and it doesn't like stay on that hot iron plate. And in the same way, the Buddha says it is with those acquisitions in that person. They can like form and then sort of be present for a little while. But once mindfulness arises and once they come in contact with the mindfulness, or once the mindfulness comes in contact with them, immediately they are basically vaporized, they immediately let go of, and they immediately vanish. So in the same way, those acquisitions vanish just as those water drops evaporate right away. So that kind of person has a very strong mindfulness already. And again, the Buddha says, still they are fettered because the acquisitions still are present from time to time, or those thoughts and intentions connected with the acquisitions are present from time to time. So they're still fettered to samsara. And again, the Buddha says he knows the particular diversity of faculties in this person. So the Buddha would know they have a certain level of wisdom, they have a certain level of mindfulness, they have a certain level of this abandoning power, ability to let things go. And that would be higher than the first two persons, but still not at the level of somebody who is fully liberated. And then we have the fourth kind of person, and the Buddha says, here, Udayan, some person, having understood that acquisition is the root of suffering, divests himself of the acquisitions and is liberated in the destruction of the acquisitions. Such a person I call unfettered, not fettered. Why is that? Because I have known the particular diversity of faculties in this person. So now here, finally, we have the Arahant, a fully liberated person, somebody who is unfettered, no longer bound to samsara, no longer bound to rebirth. Because this person has really understood that all acquisitions lead to suffering. And they understand that if they don't let this go, then the only thing that they will get in the future is further suffering. So their wisdom is really strong, their mindfulness is really strong. And of course, from that strong wisdom and strong mindfulness, it follows that they will be able to abandon all the acquisitions, let go everything, and really, and that really results in the full destruction of all the acquisitions, of everything that they cling to in their mind, of all the attachments that they have, because they can see so directly that all this just leads to suffering. And such a person then will obviously be unfettered, liberated from samsara. So these are the four kinds of person. And then the Buddha continues with another slightly related topic. So he is coming at the same issue from a slightly different angle. And then the Buddha says, there are, Udayan, 5 cords of sensual pleasure. What are the 5? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. Sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, flavors cognizable by the tongue, and tangibles cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of lust. These are the 5 courts of sensual pleasure. So I think everybody is familiar with these 5. Basically, these are the 5 senses with the 5 external objects. When they come into contact, we perceive them, and then that results in either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral feelings. And obviously that then gives rise, if we are not mindful, or if we just follow our habit patterns, that gives rise to greed, to aversion, or to delusion. And that fetters us, that gives rise to the acquisitions, that gives rise to all our attachments or aversions. And that is what binds us to samsara. So these 5 courts of sensual pleasure. And then the Buddha says, now Udayan, the pleasure and joy that arise dependent on these 5 courts of sensual pleasure are called sensual pleasures. A filthy pleasure, a coarse pleasure, an ignoble pleasure. I say of this kind of pleasure that it should not be pursued, that it should not be developed, that it should not be cultivated, and that it should be feared. So obviously the Buddha says there is some kind of joy and some pleasure that we feel from the contact with these 5 senses. There are kind of pleasurable feelings that we can get. There can be some joy that arises in the mind, dependent on these objects or these kind of contacts. But the pleasure is there, but this pleasure is really coarse. It's really very undesirable compared to other kinds of pleasure that we could have, especially, of course, the Buddha is referring here to the pleasures that we get from deep samadhi, the pleasure that we can get in jhanas, the pleasure that we can get from mental development, and also, of course, the pleasure that we can get from letting things go. So from being unfettered, from being released from all these attachments, from a mind that is calm and resting in itself and completely in balance and completely clear and bright, that leads to a pleasure that comes out of the mind. And that is obviously a much, much, much higher pleasure than anything we could ever get from the 5 senses. And for that reason, the Buddha calls this pleasure a coarse pleasure. And also the Buddha says, of course, this shouldn't be developed. And of course, this should be feared, because this kind of pleasure leads to attachment, and attachment leads to suffering. So it's a really big problem. And of course, now the Buddha talks about these higher kinds of pleasures. And the Buddha says, here, Udayan, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana. And then follows the first jhana formula that is elided here, of course, with the jhana factors, vitaka and vichara. So here translated as applied and sustained thought, and then rapture and pleasure, so piti and sukha. And then with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, he enters upon and abides in the second jhana, so the second jhana, and then again it is elided. The second jhana still has piti and sukha. With the fading away as well of rapture, piti, he enters upon and abides in the third jhana, and then with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, he enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana. So we see how gradually more and more things are abandoned, and the pleasure that we can get from samadhi is higher and higher. And the highest pleasure that we can get here is in the fourth jhana. And the fourth jhana, as we can see, we have abandoned both piti and sukha, so the mental pleasure and the bodily enjoyable feeling. So piti, what is translated here as rapture, is the mental pleasure, and sukha, which is translated here as pleasure, is our bodily feeling of ease and of an agreeable feeling in the body. And once we have abandoned both of these, we have complete equanimity in the mind. So the rapture is replaced by equanimity, and the bodily pleasurable feeling is replaced with a neutral feeling. And that is actually the highest kind of pleasure. So the highest kind of pleasure is not to feel any pleasure anymore, because pleasure is still something that kind of keeps the mind a little bit agitated, that creates a little bit of a disturbance in the mind. And once the mind is fully equanimous and the body is fully tranquil and fully neutral, this is actually when the mind is able to rest the most, to be the most at peace. And that is actually the best kind of feeling, the most pleasurable kind of feeling, even though there is no more pleasure present in the fourth jhana. So by gradually relinquishing the coarser forms of pleasure, we come to the highest form of happiness here, which is found in this fourth jhana. And then the Buddha says, this is called the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, the bliss of enlightenment. I say of this kind of pleasure that it should be pursued, that it should be developed, that it should be cultivated, that it should not be feared. So here the Buddha calls this the bliss of renunciation. So by letting stuff go, not by acquiring more stuff, not by forming more acquisitions, by letting stuff go is how we can find deeper and deeper pleasure. The bliss of seclusion, being secluded from all the material objects, but also secluded, obviously, from our unwholesome mental states. In a totally peaceful state, this is where the bliss comes from. And of course, the bliss of peace. And here it's called the bliss of enlightenment. So this maybe needs to be qualified a little bit, because obviously the fourth jhana is not the same as being fully enlightened, but we are temporarily released from our unwholesome states. So we can experience like a little taste of enlightenment there. And of course, we learn that by letting stuff go, we can get more and more bliss. So we can see how fully letting go of everything, so total enlightenment, total liberation from all our attachments, would be the highest form of bliss. So we can understand how the bliss of enlightenment works as we progress here through those jhanas. And then the Buddha starts again and goes again through those four jhanas, and he says, "Here, Udayan, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana. Now this, I say, belongs to the perturbable. And what therein belongs to the perturbable? The applied thought and sustained thought, so vitakka and vichara, that have not ceased therein, that is what belongs to the perturbable." So now we are talking about the four jhanas again, starting again from the first one. And now the Buddha introduces a new idea or a new concept, namely what is perturbable. So something that is still able to move around the mind, to shake up the mind a little bit, just in the same way that sense pleasures or all those acquisitions were able to shake the mind and push it around in the beginning. So in a much more subtle way, in the jhana, there are still things that can shake the mind a little bit, that can perturb the mind a little bit. So as long as the mind is not fully, perfectly equanimous, there's always some little kind of agitation. That comes from that bliss and those happy feelings that are very, very subtle, but still there is a little thing there that doesn't let the mind be fully at peace. So, and in the first jhana, what sort of agitates the mind in a very subtle way, of course, but what introduces a little element of movement in the mind is vitakka and vichara, here translated as applied and sustained thought. So that is why the first jhana is still called perturbable, because the mind is not fully in complete, perfect balance yet. And then the Buddha says, "Here, Udayan, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the second jhana." So now that bhikkhu lets go of that which is agitating the mind a little bit and enters the second jhana. So the bhikkhu is letting go of vitakka and vichara, entering the second jhana. But here also the Buddha says, "This, I say, also belongs to the perturbable." So something is still agitating the mind even in the second jhana. And the Buddha says, and what therein belongs to the perturbable, the rapture and pleasure that have not ceased therein. That is what belongs to the perturbable. So now we have let go of vitaka and vichara, but we still have piti and sukha. So the mind still is not fully equanimous because we still have rapture and pleasure in the mind. So of course, we have let go of the coarser forms, vitaka and vichara, but a more subtle form of movement is still there in the mind. And so now, in the second jhana, that is why the second jhana still is called perturbable. And then the Buddha says, here, Udayan, with the fading away as well of rapture, so of piti, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the third jhana. Now this, I say, also belongs to the perturbable, and what therein belongs to the perturbable? The pleasure of equanimity that has not ceased therein. That is what belongs to the perturbable. So now that bhikkhu has let go of piti, of rapture, of the mental joyful feeling, and mentally there is equanimity now. But on the physical level, the body still has sukha. The body still has that pleasurable feeling because equanimity is quite pleasurable. Like it has a bodily experience of pleasure associated with it. And so that pleasure in the body still is considered perturbable. It still agitates the mind a tiny, tiny bit. And for that reason, the third jhana still is called perturbable. And then the Buddha says, here, Udayan, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana. Now this, I say, belongs to the imperturbable. So now in the fourth jhana, that bhikkhu has also let go of sukha, of the bodily pleasure. And at this point, the body feels totally neutral and the mind is totally equanimous. And this is considered imperturbable. Everything is totally at peace. And there's no further agitation to be found anywhere, not in the body and not in the mind. For that reason, it is imperturbable. So for people who find this interesting, this idea of perturbability and imperturbability, there is actually a sutta that talks only about this, the Anenja-Sapaya Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 106. And this is called the way to the imperturbable, so Anenja-Sapaya, way to the imperturbable. And this only talks about these ideas of imperturbability and the distinction between the first three jhanas and then the fourth jhana and everything that is higher than the fourth jhana. So the immaterial realms, because they're all based on this fourth jhana, on this total equanimity, and therefore they're all called imperturbable. And now the Buddha again goes through all of the four jhanas because he's coming at the topic again from a different angle. And again, is trying to offer another explanation for Udayan to understand what he's talking about with this abandoning of acquisitions and how to progress towards awakening. And now the Buddha says, here, Udayan, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana. That, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say, surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? Here, Udayan, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the second jhana. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say, surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? So now the Buddha is starting again with the first jhana. And again, as usual, in the first jhana formula, in the first jhana, you're secluded from sensual pleasures. You have already surmounted that much. Those acquisitions connected with the sensual realm, at least temporarily, you have sort of abandoned them and you're secluded from all these unwholesome mind states. But the Buddha says that is not enough, obviously, because the whole time he's been saying this is still perturbable, you're still fettered, and so on. So now again, he's saying this is not enough, you have to surmount this. So how do you surmount this? By developing the second jhana. And when you have developed the second jhana, you surmount the first jhana. But again, that is not enough. So gradually, the Buddha is teaching you to let stuff go. First, you let go of sensual pleasures, of all the acquisitions that are connected with the sensual world. Now you're letting go of all the acquisitions that are connected with higher stages of the mind. So now you're letting go of vitaka, vichara to get into the second jhana and so on. So the Buddha is again showing us how this whole path is just about abandoning things, about letting go of things higher and higher and higher, until there's nothing left and we are fully liberated. So now we have surmounted the first jhana with the second jhana, but again, you have to abandon that, you have to surmount it. And what surmounts it? Here, Udayan, with the fading away as well of rapture, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the third jhana. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say, surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? Here, Udayan, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say. Surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? So now we have reached the fourth jhana. We have surmounted all the three previous jhanas. We have come to the fourth jhana. This is the point up until the Buddha has taught previously. Previously, the Buddha just said this fourth jhana is considered imperturbable. But even being in this imperturbable state, so complete equanimity of the mind, complete neutral feeling of the body, even that much you still have to surmount. Like the fourth jhana is not the end. Previously, it could seem like the Buddha was saying this is the end, but obviously it isn't. Buddha says you still have to surmount that. And of course, what is higher than the fourth jhana? The immaterial realms. So now we are going through the immaterial realms. What surmounts the fourth jhana? Here, Udayan, with the complete surmounting of perceptions of form, with the disappearance of perceptions of sensory impact, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, aware that space is infinite, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the base of infinite space. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say. Surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? So now the first of the immaterial realms, of course, is the base of infinite space. To get there, we have to completely let go of all perceptions of form. So this is what we abandon now. And we also let go of all perceptions of sensory impact. So we have no more feeling of our body whatsoever, or any kind of material objects, any kind of even like the subtle matter that exists in deva states. Not only the gross matter that we have in the human world, but also subtle matter in the deva states. We let go of all of this and are now in the formless realms where there is no more matter or no more form whatsoever. And we just perceive that space is infinite and abide in this perception. But even that, again, we have to surmount. And that, of course, is surmounted with the base of infinite consciousness. Here, Udayan, by completely surmounting the base of infinite space, aware that consciousness is infinite, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the base of infinite consciousness. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say. Surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? Here, Udayan, by completely surmounting the base of infinite consciousness, aware that there's nothing, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the base of nothingness. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say. Surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? So now we have surmounted the base of infinite consciousness with the base of nothingness. Even that we have to surmount now, of course, with the next, which is the base of neither perception nor non-perception. And the Buddha says, here, Udayan, by completely surmounting the base of nothingness, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the base of neither perception nor non-perception. That surmounts it. But that too, I say, is not enough. Abandon it, I say. Surmount it, I say. And what surmounts it? So we have reached now the highest of the formless realms. And of course, we know even the highest of the formless realms still is in samsara, so still is not nibbana, still has to be abandoned in order to be fully liberated. And this is where the Buddha has arrived now. And the Buddha says, here, Udayan, by completely surmounting the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the cessation of perception and feeling. that surmounts it. Thus I speak of the abandoning even of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Do you see, Udayan, any fetter, small or great, of whose abandoning I do not speak? No, Venerable Sir. So again, the Bhikkhu is saying, the Buddha is saying, even the highest of the formless realms, neither perception nor non-perception, has to be surmounted, has to be abandoned. So clearly, again, he's asking Udayan, is there any fetter, small or great, who I don't say you have to abandon, of whose abandoning I do not speak? So, and Udayan obviously confirms that no, the Buddha says that everything, absolutely everything, has to be abandoned. So this obviously ties back into the beginning of the sutta. So the sutta comes full circle, picking up again Udayan's first point, where the Udayan was talking about this fairly minor issue of precepts that have to do with food, how to eat, only to eat in the first half of the day, in the morning period of the day, and how he first was reflecting that this is such a minor and trifling issue, and he didn't quite understand why the Buddha thought it was important and why somebody should train in these really small things. And now the Buddha is again pointing out that even if you think it is small, still you have to abandon it, because if you don't abandon that, then even this tiny thing will be what binds you to samsara and will be what keeps you in suffering and in the cycle of rebirth. So whether the fetter is small or great, you have to abandon it. And of course, if you don't even abandon those kind of material acquisitions, how can you ever hope to abandon the fetters that belong to those higher stages of the mind, those jhana realms and those immaterial realms? And of course, Udayan, finally, and Udayan's mind was quite coarse in the beginning. He was just thinking about all the benefits he got from not eating in the afternoon. And now the Buddha has kind of uplifted him and has kind of elevated the topic of conversation to like the highest purpose of reaching Nibbana, instead of just, talking about all these material things, talking about food and the food rules. The Buddha has taken that as an opportunity to teach Udayan about relinquishing everything, including all the jhana states, including all the immaterial realms, including anything that can bind us to samsara. So that is what the Blessed One said, and the Venerable Udayan was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So I hope you enjoyed this sutta that teaches about the abandoning of the acquisitions and tells us how different people have different faculties and different abandoning power. And of course, this is something we can train. We should all train in our abandoning power and hopefully develop our ability to let things go as quickly and as completely as possible. And now, if you have any questions, please type them in the live chat and I will see if I can answer them. So I see there was quite a bit of discussion in the live chat. Let me see if I can find any questions. So welcome to everybody who has joined. Nice to see so many people. Welcome to all of you. Somebody's from Bangladesh. That's really nice. It's good to have such an international community. Nice to see you all. So a person with a username that I cannot read asks, what is suffering? But then seems to have answered their own question by saying acquisition of suffering, acquisition of impermanent body, acquisition of samadhi, and vipassana is the way to enlighten. So I am assuming that they answered their own question. Oh, and then there's Venerable Jnana Ratana Bhikkhu. Nice to see you. Venerable, thank you so much for joining in. And he's saying, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May all beings be well and happy. Yeah, we all hope so. And we all wish for everybody to be well and happy and to reach enlightenment. And Buddha Ruchi says, Aya, earlier in the talk, you put perception before feeling. This makes perfect sense to me. First, we perceive something and afterwards feelings develop about what we perceive. But the 5 aggregates place feeling first. Why? I've often wondered about this. Well, I think it depends on how we define perception and how we define feeling. So obviously feeling just means pleasurable, painful, or neutral feeling in the body. So as a sense object hits our sense organ, that can either produce like a painful, a pleasurable, or a neutral contact. Let's say something hits our skin, then we have a touch contact, and that touch contact can be painful, but it could also be pleasurable, or it could be neutral. And for that reason, usually feeling comes first because it's immediate. Like with the contact, something hitting our skin, there will either be pain or there will be pleasure or neutral in the body. And that is and then we perceive that impact in the mind. So that is already the next step. So because feeling is kind of what we feel with the body, that's not actually something that we can influence too much. On top of that, we can have a mental experience that can either be joyous or that can be a mental kind of pain. And that is what we can influence, but that is what arises after perception. So maybe the feeling that you're talking about is maybe the mental feeling, because that is what arises after perception, and that is what we usually call a sankhara, not a vedana. And so this is what kind of leads us to form attachments. A pleasurable mental feeling often leads then to attachment, or a painful mental feeling can lead to aversion and so on. So these are sankharas that arise after the perception. But the immediate body contact is something that is before the perception. So I hope that maybe clarified that a little bit. And Gita says, with the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, do we enter the 9th stage, where we are at the door to Nibbana, only accessible to non-returners, Anagami, and Arahant. Yeah, so with the cessation of perception and feeling and consciousness, sometimes this is called the 9th stage. The suttas don't call it the 9th stage. This is just outside of even the 4 formless realms. So this is just something that is extra. Because consciousness completely ceases, so we don't really have any experience there. And yes, this is only accessible to non-returners and arahants, so this is something that is uniquely only available in the Buddha's teaching, because only in the Buddha's teaching we can attain to the anagami or arahant stage. And yeah, this is the same thing as what you are referring to here. But yeah, as I mentioned, the suttas don't usually call it the 9th stage. I think that's a pretty modern invention to call it the 9th stage, but some people do. And Gita says, arahantship is achieved with absolute elimination of the higher subtle fetters. Is this correct, Aya? Yeah. So in Buddhism, we have 10 fetters, 5 lower fetters, 5 higher fetters. The 5 lower fetters are eliminated for the anagami level. And the higher fetters are eliminated for the arahant. So correct what Gita is saying here. And of course, the arahant also has abandoned the lower fetters, not only the higher fetters. They have abandoned all of the 10 fetters permanently, and they can never arise again. And Charles Lee says, thank you again, Aya. It sounds like progressing through the jhana states is like progressively awakening and progressively breaking the links of dependent origination. Do I have that correct? So, yeah, it's kind of like progressively awakening, although, I mean, you're progressively abandoning various things. So in that sense, you're progressively being liberated from samsara. In that sense, you're progressively awakening. On the other hand, jhanas are just temporarily suppressing those defilements. They don't necessarily get rid of them for good. It is wisdom that gets rid of them for good. So the insight into how they lead to suffering, those attachments, that gets rid of them for good. So the jhanas themselves are actually accessible to practitioners of samadhi that may not necessarily be Buddhist. So technically, people who practice other kind of spiritual pathways could also access jhanas and could temporarily suppress those defilements, but they don't develop the wisdom to fully let go of them. Progressing through the jhanas is like progressively awakening. That is correct. If you have the wisdom that goes with it. So in this case, jhanas don't work all by themselves. You also need to have a little bit of insight practice to understand how that progress works. As the Buddha explained here, how those higher stages of peace lead to much higher stages of bliss, and how these acquisitions lead to suffering. And once you understand that, you can really break through and let them go for good and not just temporarily suppress them. And then Sud is asking, so Aya, if jhana is achieved by letting go, why is it they say develop loving kindness and Brahma Viharas? Isn't it acquiring things through these things, although those things are maybe wholesome? Well, actually, the jhana realms are actually equivalent to the Brahma realms. So those gods that live in those subtle or those fine material realms called the jhana realms, those gods are called the Brahma gods. And so those gods are like they permanently abide in those feelings either of equanimity or of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, or mudita, joy, sympathetic joy. So these are actually equivalent states. So if you become really, really good at the Brahma Vihara practice, you can also enter jhana through that meditation technique. And the reason for that is that if you really, really practice Brahma Viharas properly and well, then that will include the entire universe, all beings everywhere. And that really opens up your mind and that opens up your heart. And in order to open up your mind and your heart, you have to let go of everything that your heart clings to and that makes your heart fettered and bound to something. Because if it is fettered and bound, it cannot fully open up. So Brahma Vihara practice, taken to its ultimate conclusion, also requires you to let go of all the fetters. And for that reason, it is very similar to jhana practice in that respect. It's just another avenue that you can take to get into those jhana states. So it's not acquiring something. It is really, Brahma Vihara practice requires you to let go of everything. It's actually the other way around. And Claudia says, is it necessary to reach the 8th stage jhana to be able to reach nibbana? Is full awakening only happening when we are generally able to go up in meditation to the highest jhana? So no, not necessarily. It depends on how strong your wisdom is. If your wisdom is strong enough after the first jhana to see how everything is suffering and how all your acquisitions lead to suffering and you can let go of everything, then the first jhana may be enough. So it all depends on your abandoning power. As the Buddha said here, some people are able to let go with quite little effort to let go of even the most pleasurable things, while other people struggle a lot to let go of even like pretty inferior, bad stuff. So it all depends on your abandoning power. And there's actually another sutta called the Atthakkanagara Sutta, but it's, I think, more well known as the 11 Doors to the Deathless. And in that sutta, the Buddha talks about exactly this issue, and he tells us of how the 4 jhanas and the 4 Brahma Viharas and the first 3 of the 4 immaterial realms can all lead to that breakthrough to Nibbana if you have the proper reflections. So again, I think this is also interesting for the question just now about the Brahma Viharas. Again, this Atthakkanagara Sutta also shows us how Brahma Viharas can lead to that breakthrough to full enlightenment if they are accompanied by the right insight and the right wisdom. And okay, that was the last question. Everybody seems quite happy. And time is also up for today. So I hope you all enjoyed this sutta. I think it's a really beautiful sutta. I wish you all a good rest of the day, a good week, and I will see you all next Tuesday. We will finish today with 3 sadhus as usual. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Have a good week.